The first time she saw it, my older sister Sarah just scoffed. It was a rare Sunday dinner, the kind my husband Mark insisted we host. Family should stick together, he declared, his voice resonating with that particular brand of earnestness that always left me feeling both cherished and slightly exposed. I'd been a little nervous precisely because I knew Sarah's opinion of me, or more accurately, her opinion of what she considered my life choices. She'd always navigated life with a compass pointing due north, the golden child who'd followed the blueprint with unerring precision. I, on the other hand, was the creative one, the dreamer, the one who, in her eyes, had married someone who hadn't achieved the stereotypical markers of success by 30. I'd been wearing the ring for about 6 months by then. It was a simple gold band, cradling a stone that I'd found, and still found, to be elegant and understated. Mark had given it to me for our 10th anniversary. He'd confessed, with a shy sort of pride, that he'd been saving for ages. I adored it because it was entirely his choice, a testament to his effort. It wasn't ostentatious, not like the elaborate solitaires that adorned the fingers of some of my other friends, but it was us. It possessed a quiet beauty, a depth that to me mirrored the very essence of him. Sarah had been in the midst of a particularly vivid recounting of some extravagant trip her husband had whisked her away on. The narrative was peppered with details of designer shopping sprees and meals at Michelin-starred establishments. As she gestured dramatically to emphasize a point, her own diamond-studded tennis bracelet had caught the ambient light, sending a cascade of tiny rainbows across the dining room. Then her gaze had drifted, and her eyes had landed on my hand, which had been resting, perhaps a little too casually, on the crisp white tablecloth. "Oh, that," she'd said, her voice laced with an immediate, almost involuntary dismissiveness. A languid, dismissive wave of her hand punctuated the words. "Cute. Is that cubic zirconia?" The question hung in the air, suddenly thick and heavy, and undeniably laced with a familiar, ingrained condescension. Mark, seated beside me, had visibly tensed. I'd seen his fork pause, suspended halfway to his mouth, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. A warmth unwelcome and tinged with embarrassment had begun to creep up my neck, a flush that I desperately tried to control. "No," I'd replied, my voice carefully modulated, striving for an evenness that I didn't entirely feel. "It's a real stone." She'd let out a short, sharp, incredulous laugh. "Sure, honey. Whatever you say. Does it sparkle like the real thing? Because sometimes those fake ones can fool people from a distance, I guess." She'd then, with a swift and decisive movement, turned her attention back to her ongoing story, as if my ring, and by extension my entire life, had been deemed too insignificant, too utterly lacking in consequence, to warrant any further consideration. My younger sister, Emily, who had also been present for this exchange, had immediately piped up, her loyalty a protective shield. "Sarah, that's not nice. It looks beautiful on her." Sarah had merely rolled her eyes, a gesture so theatrical it almost felt like a performance. "Emily, you're too sweet. And frankly, too easily fooled. Honestly, I thought you'd have learned by now that quality matters. And that little thing on your finger just doesn't scream quality." The remainder of the evening had, for me, become a blur. Forced smiles, strained conversation, a persistent sense of unease that settled like a heavy cloak. Mark had remained largely quiet, his usual easy conversational flow subdued, but his hand had found mine under the table, a silent, grounding anchor in the swirling social currents. I felt a knot of resentment, tight and insistent, beginning to tighten in my chest. It wasn't solely for Sarah's pointed words, but for the underlying unspoken implication that I wasn't worthy of genuine quality, that my choices, my husband, were somehow inherently less valuable, less significant than hers. After Sarah and her husband had departed, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and an even fainter echo of judgment, Mark had turned to me, his brow furrowed with concern. "Are you okay?" She was awful. I'd managed a weak smile, a flimsy facade. "I'm fine. Just Sarah being Sarah." But the truth was I wasn't fine. Her words, so casually delivered, had chipped away at something precious, at the quiet pride I felt in my anniversary gift, in the integrity of my marriage, in the choices that had shaped my life. For weeks the incident gnawed at me. I kept replaying the scene in my mind. The casual dismissal, the almost instantaneous assumption that I couldn't possibly possess anything of genuine value. It wasn't about the monetary cost of the ring, not fundamentally. It was about the deeply ingrained belief, reflected in Sarah's words, that I wasn't deserving. that I had, in some fundamental way, settled for less. Driven by a quiet, persistent need to understand, I decided to do some research. I knew Mark hadn't purchased my ring from a prominent, high-end jeweler. He discovered a smaller, independent craftsman in a neighboring town, a solitary figure known for creating unique, vintage-inspired pieces. I vaguely remembered Mark showing me the receipt, a brief, almost embarrassed gesture, accompanying it with a murmured apology that he didn't want me to think he was being frivolous. I tucked it away, almost as an afterthought, into a box of important documents, fully intending to file it properly at some later, more opportune moment. I located the box, a nondescript cardboard container tucked away in the back of a closet, filled with a jumble of old insurance papers, warranties, and various certificates. I dug through the accumulated detritus of our shared life, my fingers sifting through brittle paper, until finally, I unearthed the receipt. I held it for a long moment, the faint ink of the handwritten details a tangible link to Mark's thoughtfulness. A slow, deliberate breath escaped my lips. Then I turned to my laptop and began to research. I looked up the jeweler's name, then delved into the specifics of the stones cut as listed on the receipt, and finally, I began to investigate the prevailing market value for such a piece. The numbers I discovered were unexpected. More than unexpected, they were astonishing. The jeweler, it turned out, was not just any craftsman. He was renowned in certain circles for his ability to source rare, exceptional stones that possessed an intrinsic beauty and value far beyond the ordinary. My simple gold band wasn't merely gold. It was fashioned from a specific, ethically sourced alloy. And the stone, the one Sarah had so dismissively and confidently labeled as cubic zirconia, was something else entirely. Something rare, something significant, something that commanded a price tag that far, far exceeded anything I could have ever imagined. The initial wave of shock, a tingling sensation that ran through my entire body, gradually gave way to a peculiar sense of calm. It wasn't about launching a grand, dramatic campaign to prove Sarah wrong. It was about a quiet, internal recalibration. It was about the profound satisfaction of knowing the truth, a truth that had been present all along, quietly overlooked and systematically underestimated. The next family gathering was Emily's engagement party. It was held at a trendy rooftop bar, a space characterized by exposed brick, Edison bulbs, and a dizzying array of artisanal cocktails. Sarah was there, of course, radiating an aura of impeccable style, her husband a silent, equally polished shadow by her side. She made a swift beeline for me the moment she spotted me, her eyes performing their usual practice scan of my attire, cataloging every perceived detail. "Oh, still wearing that same old thing," she remarked, a slight, almost imperceptible frown etching itself onto her perfectly smooth forehead. "I thought you'd have upgraded by now. Honestly, some people just have no sense of style or, well, anything." She then nudged her husband with a subtle movement of her shoulder. "Isn't that right, darling?" He offered a polite, non-committal smile, his expression carefully neutral. I simply looked at her. I didn't flinch. I didn't feel the familiar urge to become defensive. I simply met her gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "It's a lovely ring," I said, my voice soft but carrying clearly through the low hum of conversation. "Mark chose it for me. It has a very interesting history." Sarah visibly bristled, her cultivated composure faltering for a fraction of a second. "History? What history could a piece like that possibly have?" Just then Emily, looking radiant and utterly beaming, navigated her way through the throng and joined us. "Oh, Mom and Dad are here. Let's go say hello. And hey sis, your ring is beautiful, really. I love the unique setting." Sarah gave Emily a tight, polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then turned her attention back to me, her gaze narrowing slightly. "Well, I'm sure it holds sentimental value. That's what matters, I suppose. To some people." The conversation predictably drifted. I made no effort to press the point, too elaborate, to reveal anything further. I didn't need to. I watched as Sarah, sensing a subtle shift in the conversational dynamics, subtly angled her body away from me, her attention now firmly focused on a group of people she deemed more important, more affluent, more worthy of her time and engagement. A few weeks later, Mark and I found ourselves at a small, informal dinner party hosted by a mutual friend. The conversation, as it often does in such settings, eventually meandered its way towards the topic of jewelry. Someone, admiring the subtle gleam of my ring, inquired about the stone. Before I could even formulate a response, Mark, with his characteristic quiet pride, interjected. Oh, that's my anniversary gift to her. It's a rather special piece. A rare Ceylon sapphire, sourced by a remarkable artisan. We had it appraised for insurance purposes recently, and the valuation was quite surprising. He didn't offer a specific figure. He didn't need to. The single word, surprising, was enough to pique interest. The host, a woman with a reputation for having a keen eye for quality and a formidable network of acquaintances, leaned in, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. Ceylon sapphire, you say? How fascinating. Some of those older cuts from that region can be absolutely stunning. Do you know the approximate carat weight? Mark glanced at me, a gentle, knowing smile playing in his eyes. It's not about the carat weight for us. It's about the story and the craftsmanship. But yes, it is quite substantial. And the color is truly remarkable. A few other guests chimed in, their voices contributing to a low hum of impressed murmurs. I could feel the atmosphere subtly shifting, the unspoken judgments dissolving like sugar in hot tea. The casual dismissal, the ingrained assumption of mediocrity, evaporated like morning mist under a rising sun. It wasn't about a price tag being ostentatiously revealed. It was about the quiet certainty of intrinsic value, articulated by someone who knew, someone whose opinion was implicitly respected. I saw Sarah a few days after that dinner party, at a charity event. She approached me, not with her usual air of detached superiority, but with a strange, almost guarded politeness that felt entirely alien. "Hello," she said, her voice carrying a faint, almost imperceptible strain. "I heard about your ring." Mark mentioned. Well, he mentioned it was quite a significant piece. I offered her a smile, a genuine calm smile this time, unburdened by defensiveness. "It is. And I love it." She hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Then, almost grudgingly, the words tumbled out. "It's a very beautiful. I must have misjudged it before." The words were clipped, awkward, and undeniably laced with a discomfort I hadn't heard from her before. It wasn't a true apology, not in any conventional sense, but it was undeniably a crack in her carefully constructed armor of certainty. She couldn't reconcile how something so beautiful, so demonstrably valuable, could be on my hand, chosen by my husband, who wasn't a titan of industry or a captain of commerce. She couldn't bridge the perceived gap between the lack of overt status symbols and the undeniable reality of the stone's intrinsic worth. Her judgment had been rooted in superficiality, in her own rigid, self-imposed framework of what constituted success and value. And now that framework was beginning to show its undeniable cracks. She eventually moved on, her attention drawn as always towards more important people, but the brief interaction lingered in the air, a subtle residue of her discomfort, an unspoken acknowledgement of a paradigm shift. She looked at me differently now, a fleeting flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. It wasn't about me suddenly becoming wealthy or powerful in her estimation. It was about her own limited perception being directly and undeniably challenged. The quiet truth of my ring had performed its subtle work, not by shouting its value from the rooftops, but by simply existing, and by being acknowledged by someone whose opinion Sarah actually respected. The social consequence wasn't a grand spectacle, but a quiet unraveling of her ingrained certainty, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in how she perceived me, and by extension, how she perceived the world around her. It was a small private vindication, as cool and clear as the stone adorning my finger.